with everybody.
Just restarted the recording.
Right.
Yes, please. Okay, good afternoon. This is the February 4, 2021 meeting of the Steering Committee for the Vermont Climate Council. We're here with 5 of the 6 council members, I believe. Steering Committee meetings are soon to be full-time program director, Jane, and Dave Plum, our facilitator, and there are some members of the public who are in attendance. This meeting video will be posted to the Agency of Administration's website as soon as ADS is able to make it available for posting. So I think we can get started with the overview of today's agenda. Welcome everyone, and today's agenda for the Steering Committee includes approval of the minutes from our first steering committee last week, and I'd like to have a conversation with David when we get back up to that about how we want to handle meeting minutes in the consensus model. We'll be discussing subcommittee membership. We'll be reviewing the draft process roadmap that David Plum and CBI have helped create, and we'll discuss the February 22nd council meeting agenda, and then any next steps and take public comment. So with that, David, we have a set of minutes from February 1st, and since this is our first set of minutes as the steering committee and the consensus model, I'd love to hear from you how if you have recommendations and suggestions for minutes that we can discuss.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Secretary Young. Yeah, so with minutes, I feel my feeling with them is if anybody has concerns about them, this is a good time to raise those concerns. If nobody has concerns, we note that and move on and consider them to be approved, would be my recommended approach to this. And I do want to thank whoever took those minutes, Melissa or whoever. I want to thank you so much for doing that. That's very helpful. They are available online. I don't know if everybody clicked through and found, like, if you find the February 1 meeting, and then there's like the link, and then there's the minutes. You can click on that and you can see the minutes. So we can make it a habit before we get on the line. Everyone just takes a quick peek at the last set of minutes and make sure it's working. If there's any concerns, we can address it right here. So in that spirit, does anybody have any concerns about the minutes or is unable to find the minutes?
I will just know.
Go ahead, Jared.
Sorry. I believe they were attached to the email. I will just note, though, that in the agenda, when you click through on the link, it's at least taking me back to the Agency for Administration webpage and not linking actually to the minutes.
Right. Yeah, it'd be better to have it go right to that document. You can find it from the Agency Administration website. You go into the February 1 meeting, and then you can find there is a link. But in the future, it would be great to have it go straight to the doc.
Also, I believe, David, that Melissa included everything in an email to the entire council yesterday, including the minutes, Melissa. So it should be in an email for council members as well, and steering committee.
It's on the calendar invite as well.
My hope is that with minutes, and my practice would be to try to, we want to make sure they give us the pathway to the future in addition to memorializing what happened. So if there are any concerns about them, to raise them up even before we approve them. That way we're getting our next steps right, because that's the key piece about this. So if folks haven't had a chance to review or look at this, what we can do is say for our next steering committee meeting, we'll approve minutes from the last one and this one. We'll do 2 sets of approvals there if folks feel like they need more time to look at it. That way we don't waste time right now doing it. But does anybody feel, would anybody appreciate some more time to go through those minutes? Are people okay? You're okay?
I'm okay. I'm okay.
Okay, you're okay, Jared? Okay, so let's say that the minutes are okay. I haven't heard anybody raise up from steering committee members concerns about them. So let's assume that they are okay because of that. So thank you for that. And we will make sure that it's very clear ahead of time how to get to that link. And so we can just do a quick approval at the top of the meeting. Right. Okay. Next comes the main course of this meeting, which is understanding the subcommittee membership. And I want to preface this conversation with a few things because there's been a lot of moving pieces. We are all moving so fast here. And we've got a fair amount of feedback that started in our last steering committee meeting amongst you and amongst some public comment that we got, and then some email traffic afterwards. And I think it's just important to say what we're hearing, because what we're hearing is saying, you know what, we actually need a slightly different process here. And I think it's important to say that straight up out of the gate here. I'm just going to drop something in the chat, which is like a 3-bullet summary of what I sense we're hearing through the emails, the email traffic, and what we've heard in our previous meeting. Let me just see if I can do this in the chat. Apologize if I'm not as speedy here on Teams. Here we go. See if that comes through to you in your chat, just as a way to, it might be a little bit funny formatted. So what are we hearing? It sounds like we need a revised approach, okay? We've heard the interest in something more of like a phased approach for populating these subcommittees because it feels so fast to try to just get those names all correct right now, you know, and then finalize them on Monday. That feels a little fast. It feels like we should allow the subcommittees, the co-chairs and the council members that are on those subcommittees to look at it, to think it through and make some adjustments. So a phased approach is what we're hearing. We've heard calls to allow members of the public to suggest names or themselves. So we should consider if we want to do that or how we would do that. We've heard the importance of clarifying these circles of engagement, whereas membership on a subcommittee is one circle, but proactive stakeholder outreach is another, right? And there's more, right? So let's figure that out in our heads about, you know, membership on a subcommittee is not the only way that your voice can be part of this process. And finally, Secretary Moore is going to show us the numbers. And the numbers are daunting of how many names were suggested. And so in the face of that, we need to think about what really are we talking about here. So before I go on, and just Secretary Moore, what was that number you've received for total number of suggestions of sort of for membership in subcommittees?
Including ones from the administration, it was about 75.
Right. So it's a big number, right? And it seems unlikely that you all as a steering committee in this meeting right now are somehow going to do a magical, you know, come up with a slate of names out of 75 and folks who you may or may not know that well. So we need a new approach. And just before I put on the table what might be a new approach, I just want to make sure I'm capturing sort of the key feedback that you all have also seen or heard about how we're going to construct these subcommittees. Is this capturing it? Are there pieces that we're missing about what's important here?
Can I just clarify, David, with you that the phased approach would be that the subcommittee members that represent the council will be convening into their respective subcommittees first, having an organized discussion on how best to approach outreach to members of the public and or state staffers, et cetera, anybody who might be either on the subcommittee or in that targeted outreach concentric circles that you're talking about. Is that the approach that you're recommending?
That sounds like a great approach, and that's the spirit of it, right? Okay. So I think that's exactly what we're talking about. Whether it's, you know, precisely that or a version of that is what you all should talk about now. But that's what I think where you're going. I see a hand from Jared and then from Secretary Young.
I would just say I agree with all of these bullet points and think that this approach is going to be really helpful. Just to set some context here about, I think that number of 75 may be even low. I'm just going to give an example. As I tried to figure out how quickly to surface the kind of diversity of names that we might want to consider, you know, I reached out to folks who previously received nominations for the council as a whole, folks who weren't selected for the 23-member council. So I got, you know, like 50 names, I believe, 50 from one, 30 from another. I reached out to Mitzi Johnson to Tim Ash and David Zuckerman to get all of those names that had been submitted to them. And I think it was like 80 total. We sent out an email to our, network, which is thousands of people across the state, got over a dozen nominations there. And so I personally had started putting in last night by 9 o'clock, I think 11 names, but I didn't even get through as many and have the time to actually, sort through and kind of assess and compare what ended up being nearly 100 names that I got in just the span of a couple of days. And if others are finding something similar, I think we owe it to ourselves, the council, the process, to be able to be deliberative and have this phased approach where we stand up the subcommittees with the council members first, but then allow them to identify based on what they're looking to come up with and the timeline that they need to have those kind of products and processes done by, identify the kind of gaps in expertise, experience, or perspective that I think they're going to have the best sense of how they need to round out their subcommittees based on their goals and based on their starting council membership to make recommendations about what the full composition should be.
Great. Okay, yeah. Secretary Young, please go ahead.
I think Jared answered part of my question just based on his experience that he just relayed. I was wondering if that 75, Julie, included any kind of public outreach from other than council members, but, maybe from the council as a whole, going out into the public.
Yeah, that's accurate, Suzanne. It was the survey was sent to council members and not distributed more broadly than that.
Okay.
Right.
Unless a council member did, like Jared obviously did with his.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. So let me suggest two things to do quickly. One is I want to just see if we're aligned with this idea of circles of engagement and sort of an overall vision of how that might work. And then two, I want to see if we can really land something along the lines of what Jared and Lauren are saying as a pathway, and then be able to propose that you'll propose that to the full council on Monday. All right. I wonder if you can let me just share my screen for 1 second. I am not very skilled at design and making things look pretty, but I wanted to just put something out there that sort of reflected my understanding of what this circles of engagement idea is, and also what our sort of overall flow of work and how stakeholder and public engagement is going to be part of that flow of work. So I'm just going to share 2 slides with you right now, and I have not vetted these with anybody. So this is just a quick visualization of the big blocks of time of your process as a council from here till December 1st, when you are tasked with submitting a climate action plan. And this is what we've talked about previously, but it's essentially this month in February, you are standing up your subcommittees, you're orienting your subcommittees, you're getting them off and running. From March till June, your subcommittees are out there doing the hard work of developing recommendations, coming up with programs, initiatives, ideas, plans, right? And you'll be guiding, the council will be guiding that work in its monthly meetings. From July, and just this blue thing off to the side here, is that there's a pretty important milestone around stakeholder and public engagement once those recommendations are coming together as draft ideas. And what the process is imagining is there will be deliberate, proactive stakeholder and public engagement through meetings, webinars, whatever we can do in the pandemic, right? Or you can do as a council in the pandemic. And that will be led by the subcommittees themselves on their topical issues in their areas. So there's a milestone here in, May, June, around doing this outreach for around a further circle of engagement. There's a second outreach moment once the council has a chance to refine all this work from the subcommittees, compile it in together, make something coherent as a draft action plan, a climate action plan, and then by the end of September is heading out with public and stakeholder process to test this draft climate action plan. So that's a second milestone around public and stakeholder engagement that will happen once the council has something that looks like a draft climate action plan. Okay, so I mentioned this in part because this is the kinds of ideas that are being floated around in terms of how to make deliberate moments in time, deliberate milestones to reach out to a broader circle. And when we talk about these circles, this is one way to visualize it, right? The council itself is a diverse set of stakeholders. The subcommittee membership will be another layer of stakeholders, right? Then you will do that targeted stakeholder outreach and broader public outreach in those moments in time. And so additional people are part of that story, right? So if you're at 75 names, 100 names, right, of people who might be great members of your subcommittee, remember, you want to keep those relatively small. So it's only going to be a handful of those folks who end up here as a member of the subcommittee and who have time to be a member of the subcommittee. And yet many more will be part of these processes of targeted stakeholder outreach and broader public outreach. Okay, so
David,
yeah, go ahead, please.
If I can, I really like this. I would just, and I agree with this and think it's a really helpful visualization and reference point. I just wonder if there is kind of an additional way to describe that third circle, or maybe a circle between subcommittee members and targeted stakeholder outreach, which is, I imagine that when the subcommittees form, all of the kind of, experts and information and important perspectives, which may or not be stakeholders per se, will not fit on that committee. And so there will be requests from the subcommittee for people to present information, share expertise, share studies, whatever it is. But I think that what we're seeing from the initial request for participants on the subcommittee is that there's a lot of people with important, information, perspective, expertise that could be valuable to the subcommittees, even if they're not serving on them directly themselves, but they may not think of themselves as a stakeholder.
Yeah, I think that's great, and really make a reference to expertise is something. And again, the fact that you don't have time or you're not a member to actually sit on the subcommittee and invest that effort doesn't mean you don't show up, right? And you're not invited to show up, or you're not part of this targeted moment in time when there's some real material to review and improve. Okay. Should I drop these slides now so we can see each other? Okay. All right. Let me do this. Okay. So with that, my suggestion, folks, is that we try to refine as much as possible amongst yourselves a version of what's been described by Lauren or Jared and others of what this, this stepwise approach or this phased approach is going to look like, right? I've got an idea what it might be. It aligns with what I heard you describe, Lauren. But I think as long as we can sort of put our arms around that and really get a proposal on the table for the full council Monday, that would be really helpful. My suggestion is, building off what I've heard here, is essentially saying, let the co-chairs and the council members who are, members of these subcommittees meet, right? Let them review all these names that came in, right, through the survey. Let them consider other names, right? And let them do a process, right? And they can sort into these different buckets of like, oh yeah, no, this person has time and would be excellent as the right balance for the subcommittee. These people are fantastic. We will be targeting them in our expert and our stakeholder outreach, right? They do that work in the individual subcommittees sometime, late next week when they get going. And then they make a proposal, they bring that back, and the council signs off on that probably in your all's Feb 22nd meeting. So I think something like that. And at the same time, you could also say, in your public meeting on next Monday to say, members of the public, if you would like to suggest a name, including yourself, right? If you'd like to do that, send an email to this person, to Jane at blah, 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 right? And so Jane can then channel that stuff, and that you open up an additional avenue for people to nominate, right? So those are my two big ideas, and I'd welcome you guys to improve them or change them. But really, it's get the subcommittees meeting with the co-chairs and the council members. Let those subcommittees sort through the list and figure out what they want to do, and give them these buckets so it's easier to do that. And then open up a channel for the public to also provide some ideas. And then all that comes back to the full council on February 22nd. I see a couple hands up, and go ahead, whoever, just raise your hand. Sorry, I have the chat up. I can't see right now. I see Chris, go ahead, yeah.
Just remind me again, what level of staff or consultant support are the subcommittees going to have?
I'd turn that over to Secretary Young.
Yeah.
I mean, excuse me, Secretary Moore Young, to one of the two of you to chime in on how you see that going down.
I think I can start and turn it over to Julie, because I had a similar question, Chris. I think I heard Lauren, as you talked about the subcommittee's members meeting and figuring out what their needs will be in terms of other members. I think you also mentioned agency staffs, and I think that the agency staffs assigned to the committees, I mean, if you can tell us the expertise, I just think that the agencies should make the decision about the specific staff, as opposed to the committees naming names, because, you know, we are still doing the rest of our day jobs, and have, you know, staff constraints as well. And then I think it'd be a good time for Julie to answer your question, Chris, as to the status of, you know, the RFP and the RFI and what that looks like.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we have, as I think everybody should be aware, the RFI for technical services has been on the street for a couple weeks now, and responses are due tomorrow, I believe. And we timed it such that when Jane is fully in this job come next week, one of her first orders of business is going to be to sift through those RFIs and actually develop either an RFP or potentially multiple RFPs. As you may recall, the three kind of core areas were technical modeling, looking at emissions, economic modeling, looking at the cost benefit questions, and then the monitoring and assessment question identified in the Global Warming Solutions Act. And it's unclear to me, as I sit here today, whether that's one contract, two, or three, but that will be one of the things Jane will be working on. In addition, we're in the process of drafting an RFP for, or there's an RFP that's out right now for facilitation services that includes ongoing support at some level for the subcommittees. It is not anticipated to be the level of support David, for example, is currently providing to the steering committee and the council itself, but more of a consultative role. But so there will be some services available in that space. And then there will be a third RFP that I'm hoping will go out later this month for communications and outreach support specifically. So sort of back, if you think back to that figure David had posted in the PowerPoint, there were kind of two key points in time where there will be some fairly targeted stakeholder outreach and engagement efforts. In addition, we're envisioning that the communications and outreach contractor will help stand up a website for the council's effort and provide opportunities for engagement and interaction that way. My hope, and hope is probably the right word, is that we will have all these contractor resources in place by the middle of April. That may sound like a ways away, but that is an incredibly aggressive timeline in state contracting. So just know that we're moving as quickly as we can to get these resources in place. What we haven't quite figured out yet is how subcommittees will request, in particular, the technical contractors' services. The other ones are a little bit easier to envision and frankly are planned out in the RFPs. But we'll have to figure out a way to manage the technical services, because while we've sought additional resources to support those contracts, they're still finite and are going to have to be managed pretty carefully accordingly.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question?
Yeah,
Just while we're on. So the reason I was asking was I like the concentric circle concept. The question I have is, like, for the subcommittees and doing the work, like, let's say, the taking of the minutes, the recording of the items to be discussed, and even drafting of recommendations, the drafting of things to be shared. I was just trying to get a handle on to what extent that was going to be reliant upon the council members themselves to kind of self-organize and get that done versus somebody actually staffing those subcommittees. Because what I'm thinking of is then with those other concentric circles, like the outreach to groups of stakeholders, and then the others, I was just trying to figure out exactly how all that was going to be organized. Is there going to be staff support to do that, or are the chairs and co-chairs going to be expected to schedule those meetings of, like, the subcommittees with the stakeholders, the drafting of ideas, any, white papers or briefs to explore concepts, or how that's gonna work? Because to me, that's going to be part of this is where I said I agree with the concentric circles concept, but I just have questions about the execution. Not knocking down the idea at all, but just trying to understand what the support levels are going to be, or what the responsibilities and expectations are going to be.
Yeah.
Chris,
Go ahead, David, please.
I was just going to mention, and then go ahead, Secretary. Chris, what I've seen work well in other processes is that the subcommittees have an agency staffer who is really dedicated to that, keeping the ball moving, and the minutes run, and the agendas going, and in the draft documents drafted with the co-chairs, right? So there's agency staff that's putting some real effort into that. And then on the stakeholder outreach, there's support from the facilitation team and others in helping do that, along with the co-chairs. And so that combination of support seems to work. And I think the RFP structure that I've seen set up here would support that. And as long as the agency staffers can dedicate some real time to the subcommittees, that should work in what you're describing. But Secretary, go ahead if you want to put it.
Yeah, I think that said, there is going to be a need for the co-chairs in particular to provide the strategic direction. I can imagine the agency staff will be there to do some of the kind of more mundane tasks in terms of ensuring compliance with open meeting law, taking minutes, and bringing materials back to the subcommittee as requested, as well as potentially drafting. But in terms of setting agendas and calling meetings and determining the timeline for stakeholder engagement, all of that is work that to my mind would fall to the co-chairs.
Right. Okay. So, Lauren, you got your hand up patiently. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to go back to the process that you outlined. So I want to open the floor back up, though, if we want to stick on staffer conversation first.
Anything else to say about sort of staff support and what that means? Okay. Right.
I think what the secretary said, that's kind of what I was expecting. So that makes sense.
Right. Okay. Hang on, you're on mute, Jared. One sec.
Yeah. Jared got bumped.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I don't think we have to address it right now, but I think it does lead to a question. It sounds, in terms of, I'd be curious to hear from Secretary Moore and Secretary Young about how because it feels like there'll be slightly different roles potentially for agency staff. There'll be some that are kind of supporting the work of the committee. Then there are going to be others in terms of the operations of it, but then there are folks who have subject matter expertise. And are you envisioning that they would serve as members of the subcommittee, or that there would be kind of additional staff? That just is, to me, is, I don't know as though it has to be answered right now, but it's a question that gets raised, is that it feels like there's different types of staff engagement and staff support of the committees that might be helpful to delineate a little bit at some point.
That's not my question for now, but I do have that question too, Jared.
Yeah, I think, and Suzanne should weigh in once I offer this, but we're envisioning a model where there's probably 3 to 4 state agency staff with relevant technical expertise participating and helping support each of the subcommittees. I don't know that it's reasonable to think it'll extend much beyond that, and so those staff will have to wear a number of hats. And in some ways, we probably are best served to allow them to organize amongst themselves, as Suzanne accurately indicated. This is carving time out of those folks' existing responsibilities to take on the support of the subcommittee work, and so we're going to have to be flexible with what that ends up looking like in response to everything else, all the other demands that these same people have on them.
I totally agree with all of that, Secretary Moore, and I'm looking at Jane because I think much of the coordination of the technical staff and arranging for the support will probably flow through the project manager as well, and the project manager may indeed be at all of the subcommittee meetings. I guess it's an evolving model, but we do have Jane on board next week, and I think we are trying to find at least 1, if not 2 positions for her.
Correct. Yeah, we're in the process of finalizing the recruitment for the program technician to support Jane, and then we'll move and turn our attention to the legal services. But the technician may have some will obviously have capacity to assist with some of this as well. But there's a bit of building the plane while we're flying it going on here too.
So I want to circle back to the plan then for subcommittee membership. I think, Lauren, that's where you want to go. So let's circle back to that and see where we are right now. Lauren, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks for proposing that, David. I don't know that it's concern, but I just want to flesh out what you said to make sure that we're on the same page. You mentioned that once the subcommittees can be broken down, or the council members are broken down into their respective subcommittees, they can kind of gather and consider additional names. And I just want to make sure that I think, Chris, you might have dropped in the chat that there be a more formal process for public input and recognition of people who might want to be part of the subcommittees or to be added to those different concentric rings of engagement. I think instead of just overwhelming Jane and her brand new position by inundating her inbox, I think it might be really helpful if we create a Google form or a SurveyMonkey similar to what we did and post that on our website and maybe share it more broadly so that people can fill out their names, subject matter expertise, interest area in different subcommittees. And then that will be a lot easier than Jane having to sort through aberrant emails that have a lot of different input fields. And that way we can share that link more broadly and again, protect Jane's very new inbox in the new role. I just think that would offer more opportunity for public engagement and some new voices at the table.
Right. And what time frame do you see on that, Lauren, so that this doesn't sort of extend out into too long a time frame?
Well, ideally, we could create that or just mimic the exact one that we followed just through the process this week with council members and get it put up on the website, not to add more work to Melissa's plate either, but get that out there soon so we can share, all of us as council members can share that link broadly within our networks and across the state. Theoretically, we'd start getting input on that pretty quickly. And then when subcommittees form with council members, they'll have additional names to consider as they get stood up in the same process you just mentioned, David.
Okay.
So I think I'm saying the same thing that you are, but instead of just swapping emails to Jane with a survey link that can be more widely spread around, I guess.
Okay, great. Jerry?
And on that specific timing question, it strikes me that one of the kind of key points to work backwards from is that we want those lists compiled of nominations, regardless of where they've come in, whether from council members or a member of the public submitting it in the type of process that Lauren suggests. Have those compiled and ready to review by the first meeting of the subcommittee of the council, because of the subcommittees with their council members, so that they can, I would imagine in the scenario we're talking about, that would be one of their first orders of business, is looking at their goals as a subcommittee, their timeline, and then what that means for the gaps that they may see with the language that we've already developed in terms of expertise, perspective, representation, and then because, yeah.
Great. Yeah. I think
And so
I think
that would be, at the end of, perhaps their first meeting would be at like the end of next week or so. I'm imagining this being open, if we can get it out soon, having it open for about a week or a little bit less. That's short, but it's not as short as the 1-day turnaround that some of us gave folks this week.
Yeah.
I guess.
Okay. Go ahead, please.
I just have a question. I'm just trying to be a little bit realistic about this. If there's two forms that went out, I believe. Julie sent one to the entire council, and then I understand, Jared, your organization developed something else that went out more broadly. And with those two processes, we probably have, from what I'm hearing, 100 to 200 names already. And so I'm totally support getting something out there to the general public from the council, but how are we going to reconcile all of these if they're in two different formats and already? And how much time is, I guess it's just, it feels like it's not going to be something that can be sorted through in a matter of days. That's all. I'm just trying to be realistic.
Just quickly, I would note that the format that we used followed the exact format of the survey questions that what Julie sent out had. So it was so that I could, I didn't then put in everything in terms of my council recommendations that I got, but all of that information was in the same format to then input onto the link that was sent out. So I recognize the challenge that you're pointing out, Secretary Young, but I think that at least the survey we sent out asked for the exact same information.
That's very helpful. I appreciate that.
Okay. So there's a question mark in my mind whether this is something that you think you should run by the full council before you just pull the trigger on this and send out the form and announce this to the world. Is this something that'd be better for you to suggest on Monday morning and say, this is our plan, what do you think? Great, okay, it's going out this afternoon, Monday afternoon. Or you all are ready to sort of say, let's just do it and send it out now. What's your feeling on this?
Just I kind of put this in the chat, but I just think I understand that we had petitioned the existing council members for recommendations, and that Jared had sent things out. I see from Annette in the chat that BNRC had sent something out, but apparently it only listed 4 of the 5 subcommittees. But to me, it's just proper, I guess even proper etiquette for the council itself to issue this invitation. And to my mind, I would say that the steering committee could authorize that to go. I don't know that we need to take that back to the full council because it just seems, again, like the proper thing to do. But if others feel otherwise, I would certainly entertain a different argument, a counter argument to that.
How do others feel? So, Lauren?
Well, I think I agree with Chris. I would hope that the full council would feel comfortable with us moving forward with that, especially since it's all in the name of being a bit more inclusive in the process. And since we were kind of nominated by the full council to represent them here, I think the value add in waiting until the full meeting on Monday, are we meeting? Yes, we are. Is that if we wanted to have a quick conversation about the different potential changes to the input fields for a more open public survey, whatever that might look like, that we might want to have that conversation. But otherwise, I think I think the information that we collected or that you all collected through the survey was pretty comprehensive.
I have one more thought, and this is just me throwing ideas out there. If you're going and casting a much wider net, I wonder if it would be valuable to frame up the question a little differently. Instead of being, do you want to serve on the subcommittee? It's more about, or who would be a good member of the subcommittee? It's more about, are you interested in these issues? You know, do you have 4 to 8 hours a week to potentially serve on a subcommittee? Why do you think you'd be a good member, right? You know, would you like to be engaged in other ways, right? So you're kind of changing a little bit the frame on it. So it's not just, you know, just about the subcommittee membership. I put that out there as an idea. Otherwise, I don't know. It just occurs to me that might be a better approach. But I welcome folks pushing back, saying no. Let's keep the same approach as we had with the council.
No, I think that's a great idea, David, because then we'll have a fuller list of people to draw from for those specific experts or stakeholders or targeted outreach and just the general public. So I think that would be a good approach, David.
Okay.
Can I ask a Teams question? Is there a way just to give a thumbs up somehow so that we don't all have to weigh in?
Great question. Maybe,
Yes, there is.
yeah, I think this is the best way.
Yeah, they do this on Zoom as well, but to answer your question, if you were to go into the chat and put your cursor over, for instance, Sophia's, I was thinking the same thing. You'll see you can do a heart if you want. You could do a thumbs up. There are some emojis there if you
For a specific comment in the chat, you can do that.
for specific comments, but beyond that, I don't think there's I don't know of the functionality for just a vote.
Yeah.
Or a thumbs up, except this.
Yeah, right. Manual version. Okay. But to this point of, if this is a public forum and you're casting a wider net, it may be interesting and more valuable for you to frame it up a little more differently, to say these are topics that are interesting, or these topics that you think you could add something. Would you like to be, or who would you think would be a good steering, a member of the subcommittee, excuse me, you know, knowing that it's a 4 to 8 hour a week commitment from now through June, and then some additional time. I think some form like that might be, might get you better information and get people thinking as well. So not like, oh, I want to be on this thing. It's like, no, there's multiple ways to be engaged. All right. So does that sound okay? Because then Secretary Moore and I can help, you know, can get that form going.
Yeah, I guess I'm not clear. I'm happy to take a stab, work with Jane and take a stab at drafting the form. Are we looking to have that come back to the council meeting on Monday, or are we interested in trying to have something that Jane and I agree looks good and gets posted tomorrow?
Jared?
My sense would be that I would defer to you and Jane, Secretary Moore, and just in terms of the time it takes to put together. If it feels like in order to, like, you know, the amount of time it's going to take to kind of identify the fields and what questions want to be asked, that it probably wouldn't go out until Monday anyway. I think it would be fine to share with the council if you already feel like you have a sense of what that would be and it would be quicker. I think then an extra day to fill it out, say if it went out tomorrow or something, people would appreciate. I'm very open to either approach, but I would defer to you in terms of just like capacity and timing.
Right.
I think I have a sense for where it needs to go, and it could be something we could get posted as soon as tomorrow, so that it would give folks several extra days.
Right. Several extra.
Thanks, Chris, in the chat. That's great. Okay.
And then just one more question, logistics is, my intention would be to have it maybe remain open through late next week, recognizing that we're going to need to parse this information and get it to folks and so that they can review it at their initial subcommittee meetings. Is it a shared expectation that subcommittees should try to meet the week of the 15th and review this information? So that on the 22nd, subcommittees are sort of coming back to the full council with a recommendation for the committee membership. Means, or are we thinking of a more extended process? Just trying to really get a sense for how long to leave the survey open for. As some discovered last night, when I said 9 o'clock, the thing actually shuts down. Because I got a couple of emails from folks shortly after 9 with additional names saying they were in the process of entering and were closed out.
Well, maybe we can give them it's like what you do with your kids or something, like it's 9 o'clock, but yeah. So does that sound right? So what we're saying is leave the thing open till Thursday night or Friday morning or something. That gives a full day to process it, and then the week of February 15th, subcommittees start to meet, review the stuff, and then hopefully they have a slate that they bring back to the full council on February 22nd. Yeah, I mean, it may be quite challenging. They may, particularly if we're successful in this form, it could be like, I'm not quite sure how they make decisions. It's going to be tricky, right? It's not going to be an easy thing. But I think at some point, if you're committed to having a small size of subcommittee, it's just brutal. You just have to say, we're looking for 4 names here, folks, right? That's what you do. And we're looking for a good balance, great expertise. And then all these other folks fit in our concentric circles, and we're definitely going to tap them because, boy, these folks seem really helpful and like they could add a lot. Okay, great. So that is that. And that should go with an email to the full council explaining it, right? This is why this is happening, and steering committee thinks it's great because of this reason, and please go forth and share these with your networks should you want to. Kind of question or kind of explanation. Okay. All right, great. Is there anything else folks want to say on the subcommittee selection process, membership selection process? I'll say one thing, which is, I believe, Secretary Moore, you have a sort of near final version of co-chairs and council members who have put themselves in different committees, right? So that can be shared as well.
Yes, I will send that around to everyone along with the announcement of the survey and the yes, and the link to it, whether it's a SurveyMonkey or a Microsoft Forms. Did anyone have trouble accessing the Microsoft Forms? I know several of you, I guess Lauren in particular, I know you forward the partner emails right to your TNC account because I've gotten notices for meetings. Did you access it through a forwarded email or did you use it through your partner account?
I used it through my partner account.
Okay, my understanding is that sometimes that's challenging. So we'll figure out the right format as well.
Great. Okay. Great. All right, so good adapting, folks. This is one of these processes that's going to require some of this adaptation as we go. So I feel like we landed in a good place. We had a few other items on our agenda today for us as steering committee. We wanted to just do a quick heads up on what the February 22nd council meeting might look like. And we wanted to talk a little bit about the draft process roadmap. Let me just say one word about the draft process roadmap. The document that's attached to the agenda here, which is a Microsoft Word document, is what I had flagged before. It's a more narrative version of that PowerPoint and is probably, the sort of more quote unquote official version of your process roadmap. And so that would be kind of the document that gets approved by you all in the full council as well to say, yep, this is our pathway, this is how we want to operate. So our goal would be on Monday to be able to say, yep, we're good with the content. We can show the PowerPoint. We can mention the Word document as the narrative version of that. But just any feedback quickly about sort of your thoughts on how to manage this so there's not any confusion between the Microsoft Word document and the PowerPoint and the actual content. Anything there that people want to say?
Just quickly, I don't know if folks can hear me. This is
Yep.
Jared. I got kicked off of my computer and then it crashed. So I'm calling in by a phone number. I missed the last few minutes, but please, I'll just try to catch up. But I wanted you to know that I am joining just by phone at this point.
Thanks, Jared. Great. So in terms of the process roadmap, like content-wise, it hasn't changed, right? We're just giving you a different way of looking at it, which is that Microsoft Word document, which has some more detail and is more narrative. Anything people want to say about that?
I mean, I think it's helpful for that to be pointed out in whatever communication makes sense, perhaps on the document itself.
Yeah.
Or in the agenda item, that the Word document reflects the PowerPoint presented in whatever meeting you presented it. That's one idea.
I like it. And maybe they can cross-link to each other and they're both on the website. We can have their links. Yeah, great. Okay, so the idea there is on Monday, we do this moment of saying, yep, this is what we're doing. So in our email to the email out to the council about the form and everything we just talked about probably should include this as well, saying we want to confirm this is our pathway. Okay. And then finally, the February 22nd piece. We only have 2 minutes or so we don't have time for a real conversation. We were just, the hope was there, like get a little bit ahead of so we're not always racing like the day before the meeting to figure out what we're doing. But the concept of the February 22nd meeting is to give a good send off to the subcommittees with even a content send off, right? Which is taking the description of what the subcommittees are and then the full council saying, I'm really interested in you exploring this question, this dilemma, so you as a full council get to give a little voice in the send off of your subcommittees. That's the big objective as I would see it. So I'd welcome some, the 30-second pushback on that. And then we can, we'll have to schedule up another meeting just to finalize that agenda and get that sorted out. But any comments on that February 22nd agenda as like the send off for the subcommittees?
I like, oops, sorry, hand. I like the idea, David, of the full council being aware that the discussion will be for them to give input to the co-chairs of the subcommittees about precisely what you've just said. I noticed Chris has a question that I think is a very good question about, how does this interplay with the comprehensive energy planning that's going on now? And I know Commissioner Tierney certainly shares, kind of that question in her head as well. So
yeah,
I'm open to that idea, but it's just like you say, an idea that we can discuss.
Okay, great. Jared and then Chris.
I just wanted to return that sounds great to me as a focus for that partial focus for that meeting. I also just want to return. I know that a number of fellow council members had asked if I would do a context setting presentation. We're actually, EAN is in the midst of, we're getting ready to finalize our next annual progress report for the state on energy emissions, the economy, and equity. And I'd spoken previously with Secretary Moore about presenting at that meeting on the 22nd. And so if we can, and I've been preparing for that based on those previous requests and that discussion with her. So, I'm happy to basically do that however fits into that agenda, but I'm happy to also make sure that the context setting that presentation responds to this kind of moment in time and that other overall goal of the send off of those committees as well.
Thanks. I'm just going to say a quick sort of my instinct on that, Jared, and then we'll keep moving. But my instinct on that is some short version of the content that you all have through that modeling and simulation exercise you're doing, like the 15 to 20 minute version of that could be really helpful as part of the send off of that cross-sector mitigation group.
Right.
And a longer version that goes into more of the gory detail is good for the beginning of that subcommittee's work. See what I'm saying? Right? Because the modeling that you all have done is very interesting as I understand it, and could be helpful, but in a sort of a bite-sized chunk for the full council and in a bigger chunk for the subcommittee, the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. So that's my instinct on how to make best use of your data.
Yeah, so there's actually two separate but related things. One is EAN has been working for the past 3 months on a technology pathways analysis that works backwards from our emissions reduction requirements in 2025 and 2030, looks at the proven and available technologies and measures, looks at the measure characterizations that we've got from the Public Service Department and the PUC and all of these other things, and basically says, you know, not a prescription, but what are the illustrative pathways of how the rough scale and pace of change and measure adoption that could add up to getting us to these requirements. That's one thing. There's this much broader thing that I heard and that I can reference in that presentation because I think it will help set some context, especially for cross-sector mitigation. There's this much broader annual report that we have a presentation on that takes a much bigger picture view about the implications around our emissions future, our energy future, and what that means for questions around equity and justice and the economy. And I heard that as being the kind of context setting, which I think is relevant to all 4 committees that folks were originally asking for. So I just want to note that there's 2 separate.
Okay.
There's a specific.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, let's discuss that a little further. I think we don't have time today about how to make that as you know, on point and perfect as possible. Let's grab 2 more hands. I'm just conscious we're at the top of the hour. Chris, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Secretary, about bringing up the Comprehensive Energy Plan and my comment about that. One of the things that we might want to offer, you know, one of the blessings of Vermont, I think, is that it's a small state. We're kind of one big community. If it's helpful to actually engage, I would just suggest that if it's helpful to engage the council in a conversation about how the Comprehensive Energy Plan update process meshes with the council's process and the work of the subcommittees and all of that, I would just suggest use the council to have that conversation, recognizing also that, you know, certainly the administration and the different secretaries and commissioners, you guys have your, you know, certainly your day jobs, just like we all have our day jobs. And it's not to preclude that, but if it's helpful to have that conversation with the council, you know, maybe the hive mind might be able to come up with something that both add value to both efforts, maybe make the burden not feel so great trying to manage both of these processes at one time.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Secretary Young?
Yeah, thank you, Jared. I guess I don't live in your worlds as deeply as all of you do. And intuitively, as I listened to what you suggested about the EAN setting the framework for the specific subcommittee work, I wonder whether, in my mind, intuitively, that would be something you would bring, I think, to the Science and Data Committee, which is of support to the rest of the subcommittees, which is the way I was understanding the Science and Data Committee, at least in the charter. And we can talk about that more, but I just throw that out there as a question, because I don't know, you know, what science and data you're relying on and whether this is something we would want the Science and Data Committee to embrace and present to the rest of the council or the other subcommittees that doesn't need to be answered today. It's just kind of intuitively, I wonder where it fits.
Yes. Okay, great. So we're a little over, so I want to be respectful of folks' time. To be clear, what we've done here, right? We've got a pathway for dealing with meeting minutes. We have a pathway for dealing with the subcommittee membership, which involves Secretary Moore sending out this Google form or some survey, Microsoft, whatever it's going to be, some survey form, together with an email to the full council describing what's happening and also describing what's going to go on Feb 8th, and including the process document and all that. Okay. And now we just talked about February 22nd, and in principle, we like this as a send-off, and then we have some questions about how to make it as good a send-off as possible, specifically around the connection with the comprehensive energy planning, how to get the right, if any, presentations in front of them, whether it's Jared's or others. And so that's what we're working on. And we're out of time to sort of land that last part really well. Is there anything else people want to say before we finish up here today about sort of what we've done? Uh-oh. I think I'm frozen. Did I lose you guys just for a second there?
You're defrosted.
I don't know how long you lost me. Probably
We
just,
can hear you the whole time. You just
Oh,
stopped.
good. Oh, good. Oh, good. Okay. So if we're good, we promised to do some public comment. So I would say, if members of the public, this is a good time to raise your hand or drop something in the chat, and we can do that quickly. We thank folks who've been helping all along here. Any additional public comment people want to make right now? Are we good? Okay. Great. All right.
Now you're frozen.
There's a question in the chat about whether this survey will be posted to the website. I don't see why not, right? Yeah.
Yes, we will both distribute it to council members and encourage them to push it to their networks and post it on the Agency of Administration Climate Council website.
Right. Okay. Super. Anything else, folks? Great. So I think we're done. Secretary Young, anything to close up from your side?
No, I think that we've made some progress today. I think, the subcommittee membership, I think I have a better idea of where we all want to go with those subcommittees and keeping them small, but providing an opportunity for anyone who's interested to be involved in some one of those circles. So I think that's very helpful for my thinking, and I appreciate all the work that's going into this.
Yeah. All right, folks, we'll see you on Monday morning at the full council. You'll see the email traffic between then. Thanks as always, and take care.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later.
Thank you.